Alright, what's going on everyone? Since Wizards of the Coast refuses to acknowledge that Challenger decks ever existed, I've taken it upon myself to build budget versions of top tier competitive decks, and today we're looking at Pioneer Rakdos Sacrifice. This is a Rakdos mid-range deck that uses a combination of sacrifice synergies to control the board and slowly drain the opponent's life. These decks typically cost around $300 to $350, which is not bad for a non-standard deck that isn't going to rotate right. At least once you spend the money, you have it basically forever, but we can do better. The goal of this video is to just give you a starting point that you can use to build off of for very cheap. And the good news with this deck is a lot of the key cards in the deck are very cheap. The core combo cost just a little over $10, and a lot of the support pieces are also very affordable. There's just a couple cards that we can't play on a budget, those being Thoughtseize and Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Thoughtseize is very powerful. It's a hand disruption spell that significantly powers up the deck, as well as basically any black deck that plays it, but it's not an important part of the core strategy. Basically, it's great, but removing it isn't going to break the deck. Fable is a bit different, however, since it makes a token that in turn makes other tokens. It's perfect for a sacrifice deck because it gives us lots of sacrifice fodder. In fact, the token, when we sacrifice it, triggers Mayhem Devil. And then when it flips, you can make token copies of things like Blood Tithe Harvester, which also makes blood tokens. And the copies from the reflection get sacrificed, which once again synergizes well with Mayhem Devil. And the good news about this card is it's about $15 each, which is too expensive for our budget. We're going for a very, very low budget build, but it is the type of card that, you can buy one at a time, here or there, every once in a while, and get it into your deck slowly over time. The same is true for Thoughtseize. It's really nice when we don't have some like $80 to $100 card that, if we don't have it, the deck stops working. So let's get started with the cards we can actually play, starting with the main combo of the deck, Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, and Mayhem Devil. So the way this works is the cat will drain for 1 when it enters, and when it's in the graveyard, you can sacrifice a food to return it straight to the battlefield. The oven can sacrifice creatures to make food tokens, so this means you can sacrifice the cat to make food, then sacrifice the food to bring the cat back. And every time you do this, the Mayhem Devil will trigger twice. It'll trigger when you sacrifice the cat, and it will trigger when you sacrifice the food. So each turn, you can effectively deal 2 damage and deal 1, gain 1 to the opponent. And a cool trick is you can put the cat in front of an attacker before you sacrifice it to blank 1 attack per turn. If your opponent attacks with like a 4/4, you put the cat in front of it, declare the blocker, then sacrifice it. That creature does no damage, and then you just bring the cat back. So it's a lot of value, and fortunately, this combo is fairly affordable. It brings the deck total price up to just $13.16. All of this is absolutely necessary, but it's a pretty affordable package, I would say, overall. Next are some support cards, Claim the Firstborn, Eaten Alive, and Deadly Dispute. The first can gain control of a creature, which you can then sacrifice to the oven for food, or one of these other cards, Eaten Alive, will let you sacrifice a creature to exile a creature or planeswalker, so you could sacrifice the thing you get with Claim the Firstborn. We also have some sacrifice fodder for these, by the way, we'll look at those in a bit, but a Deadly Dispute can sacrifice a creature or artifact to draw 2. This is a great way to turn excess food into cards, and it also makes a treasure. That treasure can be sacrificed for future Deadly Disputes, but also just sacrificing it for mana is going to trigger Mayhem Devil. There are budget alternatives like Village Rites, for example, but the treasure we get from Deadly Dispute is so good. Remember that even though you're spending 1 extra mana on Deadly Dispute compared to Village Rites, the treasure makes up for it. You can use that treasure right away or for a future turn, so that's fine. And also, the treasure is just another thing to sacrifice and another thing that's going to trigger Mayhem Devil. So I would say it's worth it. And this brings our total up to $22.47. Next up is some sacrifice fodder. We have Unlucky Witness, Blood Tithe Harvester, and Kroxa. The first will exile the top 2 cards of your library. When it dies, and let you cast one for free, which is great because you can sacrifice this to Eaten Alive or Deadly Dispute and just get another card. The vampire makes a blood token, and then it can be sacrificed to kill a creature potentially, and both of these sacrifices will trigger Mayhem Devil. And Crooks is tricky. It's 2 mana for a 6/6, but when it enters, it makes the opponent discard, and then it has to be sacrificed unless you escaped it. So it really costs 4 mana, and you gotta exile some cards from your graveyard to get it into play. But the trick with this is when you play it, and when the discard trigger goes on the stack, you actually have time to respond to that and sacrifice it to something like an oven, which will give you 2 treasure tokens and trigger Mayhem Devil. Even if you don't do the sacrifice trick, if you have like 2 Mayhem Devils, for example, playing a Croxa will not only make them discard, but when you sacrifice it, that's 2 Mayhem Devil triggers, right? But if you have, an oven or a dispute, that's just really good value. So yeah, this brings our total up to 2656, and that's not terrible. Next up, we have our budget concessions for the deck, because we're playing 3 Duress, 2 Go for the Throat, and 3 Voldaren Epicure. Technically, these are stand-ins for Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, and Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Fatal Push, by the way, isn't too expensive, so you might consider picking those up. Most decks play 4 of them actually, and I just didn't think it was worth $10 when we could play Go for the Throat and Eaten Alive. These are basically what I've been replacing it with. But anyway, to get back to the cards we're actually playing, so most decks play 4 Thoughtseize and then 1 or 2 Duress. So we're going to go to 3 Duress on a budget. Go for the Throat is fine. It's a little slow. It's 2 mana instead of 1, but it's fine on a budget. And Voldaren Epicure does a lot of the same things as Fable, just worse. It's just much worse. So if we compare these side by side, Fable gives us filtering by letting us draw and discard. It gives us a creature token that then makes treasures, which are going to trigger Mayhem Devil. And then it flips and starts wreaking havoc by copying things. All very good. And then the Voldaren Epicure gives us a throwaway body to sacrifice and a blood token that can filter or be sacrificed to things like Deadly Dispute. So in no way is this as good, but instead of spending $60 on 4 Fables, we'll play some Voldaren Epicures for now to start with, and you should definitely be considering getting a Fable or 2 here and there going forward. But by playing these, we're massively saving on the budget. As you can see, it only adds a couple dollars to the total price and brings us to just $29.33. So now we need to talk about the mana base, and needless to say, we can't play Shocks, Pathways, or things like Urborg. These are very expensive and massively increase the price. There's also a lot of utility and creature lands this deck plays from the Kamigawa lands. Most decks play at least 1 each of these, and a lot of decks play 2 each of the Forgotten Realms creature lands, and a lot of these aren't that expensive, but they just add up when you're adding 6 or 7 of them. It's $2 here and $3 there, but once you put it all together, you're spending like $20 or $30 on a few lands. So on our budget, we're going to play 2 Blackcleave Cliffs, 2 Sulphurous Springs, and 3 Dragon Skull Summits. The first 2 are actually played in competitive decks, and competitive decks usually play 2 of each, so we're actually good there. The Dragon Skull Summit, on the other hand, is a budget land. It's not great, but it gets the job done. But ideally, these would be shock lands, which are currently like $15 each. The deck plays 4 of them, so you're looking at $60 for 4 shock lands. In our case, we're going to play 3 Dragon Skull Summits, much cheaper, and some basics and stuff too as well. So yeah, it's a little bit cheaper, and that's the whole idea. We'll also play 2 Restless Vents. These are our budget version of the Forgotten Realms lands. It's not as great because it enters tapped, but it's a dual land, so that's a nice bonus, I guess. And it does give us some filtering, which we lost with Fable. Fable normally lets us draw and discard, and now we have that in this land, so that's a nice little touch there. We're also going to be playing 5 Mountains and Swamps and 4 Foreboding Ruins. Playing this many basics means you will definitely get color screwed from time to time, but the benefit of so many basics is we can play Ruins, which is a terrible dual land in most decks, but gets much better the more basics we play, so it's actually much more likely that it enters untapped in this deck. This cycle of lands, by the way, are really nice as a budget stand-in when you're still playing a bunch of basics. And then as you upgrade and you take more basics out, you want to start replacing these. But when you're building a very base budget build of a deck with the intention of upgrading later, these cost basically nothing, and they can stand in the meantime, so that's nice. Our mana base cost is $20.77, which is a bit steep, but considering most non-budget builds have $150 in the mana base, and more than half our price here is actually in competitive lands that are played, those being the fast lands and the pain lands, it's not too bad, and it brings our total up to just $48.76. And briefly going over the sideboard, as always, I recommend tailoring your sideboard to the decks you're playing against, but we're playing one Giganta. This is important because it's a companion. It doesn't synergize in any way. It's just a free 5/5 that we can grab from the sideboard when we're low on resources. We'll have 2 each of Rending Volley, Furnace Rains, and Call Against Command, all of which are removal against specific decks. We have 1 Go Blank, 2 Soul Guide Lanterns, and 4 Damping Spheres. Note that Soul Guide Lanterns are a budget replacement for unlicensed Hearse. This is another one that's not terribly expensive. They're like $5 each, so definitely easy to upgrade into in the future. But in the meantime, we'll be playing our bulk Soul Guide Lanterns for cheap. We also have 1 Omnixilus, which is a grindy powerhouse in this archetype, and sometimes even makes the main board. I'm a big fan of it. Most decks don't play it in the main board, but it's pretty typical to see one of these in the side. And that brings our sideboard cost to $11.58, and our total deck price to $68.68. We actually have a pretty solid build. This is a very functional Rakdos Sacrifice deck. It really just needs some consistent mana and those fables. Thoughtseizes are nice. They help us shut down combo decks. They help us shut down our opponent's sideboard cards in games 2 and 3. If our opponent draws a sideboard card that just kills our deck, being able to rip it out is very nice. So don't underestimate how good Thoughtseize is. It will win you games, but at least the deck functions without it. So going forward, my first priority would probably be to get Fables in first, fix the mana, and definitely get Thoughtseize eventually, right? Either way, I hope this video was useful. If you liked it, I have an entire playlist dedicated to budget builds of meta decks, and you can find a link to it in the description below. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.